Out today. Some of you I've seen a couple times today. I spoke at an event this morning. So look, I know everybody on this panel. I'm going to let them each introduce themselves, and then I'm not going to stick to the questions if you guys don't matter at mine, because I've asked the same boring questions that the entrepreneurs submitted many times. So I'm going to mix it up a little bit, and I'm going to ask some more probing questions. So why don't we go down and each of you introduce yourselves.
Hi, my name is Mark Modica, and I was the CEO of Centerline Biomedical, but I just recently finished my year there. I had been brought in by an investor in my company called ModScore, which is really more of my long-term passion, which is about developing a way to digitize the fundraising process with analytics around video and other data sources. But Centerline Biomedical was is a medical device data company at a Cleveland clinic, and I just finished a year there raising capital, and they had a successful capital raise and FDA approval. They're about ready to go to market, and so they brought their real people in to take them to the next level.
That was the plan.
That's the plan.
Hi everyone, I'm Jeff Strobel, I'm CEO of Verilox Therapeutics. In Verilox, we're developing products targeting rare blood disorders and type 1 diabetes. These diseases are deadly, and currently they don't have a cure. We plan on bringing cures in the marketplace for them. In June, we closed our seed round at Verilox, a little over $5 million, led by Sanofi Ventures and the JDRF. And now we are just employing the cash and trying to get to the clinic.
Thanks, Krista.
Great. Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Krista Conley. So I started my first business 25 years ago. So I was the first woman to sell a company to a private equity firm in Boston. Yeah. And I was pregnant. So there are lots of techniques that can tell you what to do. I relocated to Vermont, where I helped a clinical workflow solutions company sell to Phase Forward and then to Oracle. I've been an angel investor out of the Tuck School of Business for 7 years, taught by an incredible 42 men and 1 woman, all World War II gents that learned so much from them. And then I started a digital health company commercialized out of UVM back in 2010, which won a top 10 innovation award, National Cancer Institute recognition, and blah, 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 raised cash for that. So I'm here now running a digital health consultancy and working on a nonprofit with my colleague Jackie.
Good evening, I'm Daniel Friedman. I'm co-founder, co-CEO of Burn-Along, which helps people achieve their health and wellness goals by bringing people online the 2 key things that work for them in person, which is number 1, a relatable instructor, and number 2 is social motivation. My background, I started off as a journalist. I used to write for the Wall Street Journal and Forbes and co-authored a New York Times top 10 bestseller. I worked in policy at places like the United Nations, and then spent 5 years in the intelligence world working on rehabilitation programs. The red thread for me throughout has been a focus on human behavior and motivation, and a personal experience with a family member led me to focus on the health and wellness space and take what we were doing in prison cells and rehabilitation centers to the online health and wellness space.
Excellent panel here. So I told Mark I'd start with him because he has to leave early tonight. So he's going to answer as many questions as he can before he has to dart out the door. But so on your LinkedIn profile, Mark, it says that you've raised $700 million.
Yeah.
Talk about what it's like to raise all that money and what you've learned through the various experiences.
Yeah, so Carl and I go way back for context. Carl and I met in the 90s, and I had a company called Cyber CFO, which we were sort of outsourced CFOs, but really it was more venture services. We were doing financial models and a lot of pitch decks. And then we started this thing called the Jumpstart series, which, because I'm very ADHD, I really didn't like to take a company at a time to a VC. So we had a little pitch competition that later grew into the Cooley Capital Call, which some of you might know about. So it was kind of did the first Shark Tank, I think, you and me. Carl was the brains behind it. I was just kind of like getting deal flow. So back in the day, back then, which was interesting, so the reason why you needed financial models and you needed the pitch decks was because there were very few companies that had product that worked, revenue, right? And so there was not a lot of competition. There wasn't a ton of competition for A rounds, and there's a lot of guys doing A round. Seed rounds were like family and friends, where seed rounds today are $5 million. Like, that's insane back then, right? So what's happened over time, and one of the reasons why I've started ModScore, which was Carl and I actually, we're not allowed to make trouble unless it's out of town. We were in Austin, Texas. And I said, look, I have all these algorithms around the way companies are valued, and they're valued around intangibles, not tangibles. The way companies used to be valued in the industrial age was revenue, cash flow, profit, stuff like that. And in the 80s, that changed when guys came in and broke up companies and sold off the brands and paid for their debt, and they owned the company for nothing because the brand didn't have a value on the balance sheet. And then 90s hit, and then you had all the e-commerce stuff that blew up and didn't go anywhere, but it was all very cool. And then later, that worked. So fundraising over time has changed because there's something that's happening right now, which started way back then, whereas there's more and more and more and more seed money. And there's more and more companies that have product and some revenue, but then there's a higher bar to get across that chasm of an A/B round to get to a growth round. And so that's really hard right now. So it's getting harder and harder to get to the next round. So there's more great companies. There's a lot of investors that are on the sideline because the guys that are putting the money to work and the ones that really have bought off on this sort of brand idea or throwing a bunch of money at something or in Silicon Valley and then an ecosystem. So right now we're in a period of riches in companies, but not riches in terms of the ability to fund A's and B rounds. And the data that just came out that actually A's and B's rounds are going down, right? And if you look at the rounds and the numbers and the dollars, the amounts are astronomical. So the average deal flow valuations, there's actually, it's bifurcated. So there's a whole series of companies that can get funded in an A round for like 8 on 15, a third of the company. But all of a sudden, there's these things called supergiant rounds where guys are coming in and they're seeing they're cherry picking the really great companies and they're saying, that guy's got an amazing market, I love that market, he's pitched me that market, I'm just gonna throw a ton of money at him, and if I throw a ton of money at him to get his market, I have to give him a high valuation. Like, the valuations are driven by the capital being deployed. And the capital being deployed is driven by these massive markets that people are looking at and the valuations around owning those markets. So again, the good news is, once you can cross that chasm, there's a ton of money there, but getting across is really difficult. So either you have to really, really take whatever dollar you have and not spend it wisely, or you have to be able to go out and pitch this longer, idea. So the thing that got you to $1 million in revenue, $2 million in revenue, is not going to get you the 10 on 30 or 10 on 40. The thing that's going to get you that is where you're going and what your vision was. So most of the people on here had a vision when they started out, but the thing that got them some revenue and got them some validation may not be the thing that they're doing long term. So it's really, really difficult in this day to work with what I call big ball, small ball, money ball. You have to pitch big. You have to have small amounts of very discrete data that show you have a market. So it's very small data. I have a couple clients over here, I have something over here, but if you extrapolate that, it's really big. And if I start out really big and I can get you to understand the things that I've done can go there, you have a shot. And then I call what is Moneyball, which is, there's books around that, is how do I structure my capital raise to not make it linear? Like, you will die if you go and raise 2 million, and 4 million, and 8 million. It's too hard, because you're never going to get the scale and ramp into that big idea that you have. Now in bio and pharma, it's a little different, because they're the last group of, they're the last market that has real IP. So it used to be software was very, very interesting. So you had software IP. I funded the IP. I could probably sell it. Now the guys at Cooley will tell you that IP has no value. I can break that patent. I can kill that. But except in biotech, you don't. So I'll wrap this up. So from my perspective, it's good news, bad news. Good news is amazing. You've got like groups like this across the country. I've never seen so many great companies. I've never, like your capital calls have gone from 15 years ago, it was like you looked at 10 deals, 2 or 3 like really good, all 10 are like amazing, amazing markets. However, because of all the money being in Silicon Valley and not here, there's a real gap. And again, that's a pitch for what I'm doing, because I'm just trying to fill that gap. I believe that there needs to be something online. There needs to be a way to have investors that are all over the place. Because again, if I did 700 million, there's 700 million, there was never a deal that was the same. There was never an investor that was the same. And an investor in 2009 is going to be different than an investor in 2012. So it's idiosyncratic by the fund, by the person, by the day. I've literally seen guys go from one day in 2008 funding something, the market takes a dump, and they change. Everybody was all in on all of the green sort of technologies back in the 2000s. Then all of a sudden they didn't go anywhere. It's too early. They dump them. They go over here. So what you have to understand is, the main thing I can tell you right now is you have to understand the buyers, the investors, and what they're looking for. And you have to understand how you can match what you're doing with them and how to bypass sort of getting into that trough where you're constantly raising money, but you're not getting enough flow, you're not getting enough. Like when a rocket takes off, it has to get out of gravity and to get out of the Earth's gravity, it has to have, it has to have like force, so you have to have fuel to get it out. And it has to have the right trajectory to go out. And so that's really the hard part.
All right, so this morning, for those who were at the breakfast this morning where he talked about what you need to raise capital, I was talking about the amount of revenue that you have to have and all of that. Well, Jeff here, he's raised money and he'll never have revenue, right? And so explain to those of us in the room how it works in the life sciences world, because even though I work with companies like yours, I still don't get it.
Well, thanks for that. Yeah, so there's a lot of corollaries to what you were just saying, except for the revenue piece. So a company like mine, we're not going to have revenue, but the companies that support us, if we get a strategic partnership, the venture capitalists that support us, they're looking downstream to different exit points prior to revenue, most likely, which would be selling the company upon great clinical data, phase 2 proof of concept it's called, where you show in man that your drug actually works in people, it's efficacious, it does no harm. And that's the most likely scenario where the investors are going to see their exit. And a standard therapeutic company like mine, small molecule, in a space that has a fairly large market that it could attack. A phase 2 drug, and 3 years from now, the company could sell for $500 million. Not all up front, of course. You'd think maybe it's $100 million up front, but nevertheless, the investors get their money back. Some investors, some VCs, like so for example NEA, which they would invest in a company like mine and want to take it public, and they're looking at the business case as well. So that's a little bit different of a story. There's an exit that's much longer distance from here to there. It's probably 7 to 10 years. In which case, those companies are selling for $1 billion or more. Depends on how much money's put in, how far you scale. Yeah, and the IP, that is extremely important, as you're mentioning. The investors won't invest in a therapeutics company without lockdown IP. I don't know if that's part of the question, but that is a unique thing, and it should be almost unbustable, which you try to get it there. So I think that's it.
Well, it's just a comment. It's funny that the market that I'm working in, which is most more software and services, really needs to, if people can emulate your market and understand it and pitch what's going to happen, because that's what you guys have to do. You have to pitch what this thing's going to do. If they would do that, then they would be better off. like the Centerline, we went out to raise capital, and they'd already raised 15 million bucks in their Series Seed, which is crazy. And they were pre-FDA, but we got FDA approval while we were raising capital, and so the valuations were high, so I had to go in at a 10 on 35. You know, so $35 million valuation for a company that doesn't have any revenue. Right, you got to pitch what it's going to happen and what it's going to do, and you got to pitch just like that.
Yeah, yeah.
So you got to pitch where you're going to have these exit things, and if you don't have your stuff together and you don't understand how somebody will value you for different valuation points, like for us, it was another indication getting into certain hospitals. Like, these weren't revenue things. If you look at pure revenue, you're going to get messed up. If you look at the things where there's data and there's opportunity for someone to make money, yeah. So that's really where the market's going. You really have to understand that out there.
So Krista, you were an angel investor. What are the types of things that got a company over the hump for you so that you could do an investment? Because there's a lot of folks in here that probably are at that stage.
How many of you are pre-revenue? How many of you have revenue? Okay, good.
Wonderful.
Good. Okay, so I was an angel investor prior to 2010, so from 2005 to 2010, which meant as an angel investor for our group, we would lay out $250,000 immediately, like right away, and you didn't have to have an MVP. We'd lay out $250,000, you can do your MVP. That's changed completely now, where the investors want you to, they won't even look at you unless you have an MVP. So that's a big difference. So what I want to do to just touch on what these two gentlemen have said, and I'll include Carl in that too, but it's just the big idea is really important. And in the consulting work that I'm doing lately, I'm not seeing enough big idea, really big idea. So for us as investors, I think and for me personally, would be what's the addressable market? So big, how big is the addressable market? What does that really mean? That's not just the whole market, that's the addressable market. Really, really understanding. Also, for us, very specific was we found a lot of people came in very unprepared to discuss what the competitors were in that market. And they'd get the door shown to them immediately if they didn't know what their competitors were in that market. And then the other piece that's very true to my heart is a lot of folks, particularly now, come in love with their own product. They're in love with their product. I love my product. They may be an engineer, software engineer, they may be whatever, it might be great. They have absolutely no customer engagement capability at all. And I mean, I see that every single day. So as an investor, back in the day, we just, who are your customers? Who are your customers? I also tend to like bootstrap stories. I see a lot of people spending months and months and months trying to raise money when I think could they be spending months and months and months getting a great couple of strategic partners that have funds that may then fund them and then help them. Is that right?
Yeah.
Am I right?
100%.
Okay, I don't know. You're so much more skilled than us. So being strategic,
I'm a little more
thinking
psychotic.
big, understanding your customer, really understanding your customer. And if you use the word business development, I'll slap you because it's sales. It's sales. Sales. You have to sell what you're doing. Sell it, not I'm going to do marketing.
Unless you work for a law firm.
So unless you work for a law firm, that's right too. I love him. But I
sold
mean,
without knowing you're
you
being
don't want to
sold.
talk about, if you don't want to talk about sales and you get squishy in your seat, it doesn't, it's not great. Like I was in Vermont, we had a lot of digital health companies. We had things like Keurig, Green Mountain, we had like some really big retail kinds of things. We had some stuff syndicating up from Boston that was really cool, some medical device, some other stuff. But I looked at this one guy, he had like a frozen apple pie for $16.99. And he's asking for $1 million. This is the fun part of like being in one of those places around the country that is different. So I asked him, who's your customer? What did he say?
Everybody.
No, he said to me, I said, who's your customer for your apple pie? And he said, Whole Foods. And I said, Whole Foods is your distributor. I said, who eats your pie? Who buys it? And he said, I don't know. And I said, there's the door.
That's funny.
Like, so you really have to understand these basic things. But I wouldn't be afraid. There is a little renaissance in bootstrapping happening right now. People kind of question me on that a little bit, but you know, I lived on $10 a day for 2 years. You can do it. But really finding those, if you can't get in to raise the money, think about which customers that you could get that could really make you rise as fast as possible. So I had a customer, my average size was 50,000 for a client, for a deal. I landed hardcore brace as a client, and my client's size went up to 800,000. My product size went to 800,000. So, and then we just started repeating that. And then you start repeating that with all their competitors. And so it can work. So that's, I don't know if I answered that question, but that's what I looked for.
So, Daniel, you've raised some money, but I want to talk about what you're doing now because we've exchanged emails the past couple of days. You're in the middle of getting ready for a capital raise, and you've charted it out, and I'm not going to go through what you're doing. I'll let you talk about it, but how did you come up with the target list of funds and talk to the group about how you're going about approaching these funds?
Sure. So to maybe take a step back and to say what was a mistake that probably we made in the past, and that was not speaking to funds in a structured process, but speaking to one investor week 1, another one week 3, another one week 5, and also not doing enough research on the investors and the funds themselves beforehand. So what we've done now as we gear up to do a Series A round is we look at which funds would make sense for us from does it fit in their thesis, does it fit in the industry, who are the partners that have done similar deals, so we know exactly which funds we want to go after, who are the partners in those funds that we want, and then working out how do we get warm introductions to those funds to have conversations with them so that they're going to take the meeting in the first place, and then running a tight process around that so you essentially can drive competition between the investors.
So in the funds that I don't know, who are you going to see if they know? I just want to know the whole process.
Yeah, sure. So I've got to put together a list of targeting, I think it's around 90 funds that I've sent to our existing investors and then to different friends and partners and saying, do you know these partners or do you know someone else at the funds? And are there any other funds that you think we're missing out we should be speaking to? And so a lot of my investors are people who are running companies themselves. Some of the funds listed there have invested in them, so they've come back and say, hey, I can introduce you to these 10 people. Some will come back and say, you know what, you should really be speaking to this partner instead, and this fund is not on your list. And then just going through that list to make sure that everyone who I want to reach out, number one, I've got the validation from people that I respect that I should be chatting to them. And then number 2, how am I going to reach them? And then getting introductions to them, having informal chats before formally raising from them.
And how did you get to your initial investors? Who got you to those folks?
Just pounding the pavement and speaking to a person. They say the hardest money to raise is the first money to raise. I think that's certainly true because at that point you've got no investors who can make introductions, and so it was just having conversation after conversation. And I think fundraising is like sales. With sales you're just making that extra call, you're pushing through to get through to that extra client, and fundraising is very much the same because it's the time of the day. Are you speaking to the person at the right time, and what deals have been going well for them, what hasn't been going well? And I think earlier stage is less structured than later stage, but for us on the earlier side it was just speaking to as many people as we could, seeing friends who'd raised money, getting introductions from them, going to different events like this and asking people for introductions and just building that up, and you'll get 50 no's and then finally the yeses will start coming in.
So we spoke.
I'm coming to you.
No. So we spoke beforehand, and I'm a weirdo. I go very quickly into a conversation, especially with an entrepreneur, and I know I'm going to get one thing, and I know I want something else. And it goes back to what Krista was saying. I know there's a big idea there somewhere. I know there's a big idea, and I know there was a passion, the reason why you started it. And I know that it was something that people will resonate with, and I guarantee you, every every investor that I've ever done, and they're all different, and they're all weird, and they're all like crazy, and there's a bunch of stuff, but they all had one thing in common in that first 2 or 3 minutes. If they were any good, and there's a lot that aren't good, if they were any good, they wanted to hear your story. They really cared about what you did, and they really cared about how this thing came about. So how it came about and where you're going. So we were talking, and he was giving me some of the metrics and some great stuff, and he hit on one note. It's like singing a song, and I was like, oh my God, I love that note. And you probably didn't remember what I said because you're not focused on that right now. But I heard one thing that he said that I said I would lead with that, like in your pitch.
Yep.
Because what they want to do is they're going to want to, if you get to the product too quickly and you get to the metrics too quickly, you're lost. Like unless you have, Snapchat scale, and I know that the guys that did Snapchat was the guy who funded a company that he brought me into, and I know that was a wacky story. Like it was at Stanford, they had 500,000 users, and he just needed $500,000 for servers. That's how that's.
So Mark, I want you to walk through. You take on a client, and you're going to help them with their capital raise.
Yeah.
Talk through succinctly the process you would take them through.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm
So.
going to ask you some.
Yeah. So there's 3 parts, and like I'm building sort of this model, online model, and it has each 3 of these parts. First of all, there's a picture offering analytics. So I need you to have a story, and I need it to be very much like a script. So I have 7 specific questions that I know I want answered, and that's what I'm doing. I'm building my platform has 7 30-second videos because no one wants to listen to you a lot. They want to hear and pick. So my platform is going to be I'm sending you a link, and the first thing you're going to see is somebody's pitch. It's not going to be a deck. It's going to be 7 30 seconds, and I have specific questions that I know have worked for me, and I've called these things, and it might change over time.
What are they?
So, like the first thing is, it goes in. I don't have it with me. What's your mission, right? What is the mission that you're doing? Why did you do this? And I have a good. It's better said than that. And the second thing is like, why would one person care? Which is like, there is a specific target market who would care. And then the third one is, and again, if I could look up the questions, I'd be better at this.
Sorry, I put you on the spot.
No, that's
Don't
okay.
give him another beer.
Yeah.
2 beers.
Yes, and then the third one is why would a lot of people care? So I want you to talk about your addressable market, but I don't want you to cite me a bunch of numbers that I don't care about.
Can I just for 1 second? So what he's talking about is what I'm so happy to start to see is it's the human element.
Yes.
It's the human element. We've gone through a period where that didn't matter as much.
Right.
And now, if you're not human, a relationship, sales, all those things, but if you don't have a real story that that resonates, that differentiates you, your product or your metrics or whatever is kind of meaningless. And so it's really about engagement. They got to engage you. Okay, then they got to engage your customers. Then they got to engage each other because they got to work together. There's lots of things. But people, I do find this is harder. This is a harder lesson for some folks who haven't lived that kind of way of life. So I just wanted to say that you were saying that, and that is, really. So when the British guy wanted to buy my company, he was bought by a Brit. So he said to me, I hadn't even told him a story. The first thing he said to me, I said, well, how'd you find me? And he said, I heard there were these 2 pretty brunettes in Boston. And I was like, oh, that's going to cost you. But I'm like, all right, we'll take it from there.
Hey, let me.
I said he could have said those 2 homely brunettes. I prefer that, right?
Hey,
hold on.
I want to get Jeff back.
Okay.
I want to get him back in.
That.
I want to hear
That's what
the process that is involved in the life sciences. 'Cause it's still a black box to me. Like, what was your process to get to this 5?
So before he does that, let me add to this.
It's just like
He said
crossfire.
He said the one thing that I keep harping on. What did he say? I know what someone's going to buy me for. I know how much it's worth. I know how much that's worth. If you don't know when you're successful and I give you $20 million and you get X amount of customers or subscribers, if you don't know what that's worth and you're doing some revenue or ARR model, you're done. Like this guy knows exactly what his thing is worth in sort of order of magnitude terms.
Why should we believe you? Like,
Right.
It's still a mystery to me.
Yeah, well,
Because people are buying it.
as many times as we've spoken to, and I still haven't been able to convey that to you.
We're the #1 life sciences law firm in the world, and I still don't get it. So
I got to add them for that.
So great question, right? So, you know, in my field, I think that's similar to any head of research at a publicly traded biotech company, and I had to go from that to learning how to run a company, which to me is a learning experience every single day. And one of the biggest mistakes, and I will answer your question, I wouldn't say this word. One of the biggest mistakes everyone makes, including me when they first start out, is that you think that the data is going to sell itself, but that's not what the investors are really buying. They're buying into you. And it took me a while to get that, to be able to stand up and be able to grab people and say, you need to listen to this, and it is personal. You know, part of my story that I tell when I pitch is that I'm so vested in this because this disease, this first one, killed my father, and I am going to cure it.
Yeah.
And that grabs people, and it's true. And it works. It works on a level almost every time. And it's because, you know, people want to hear a personal part. The VCs get pitched, my God, they get probably 100 decks a week, and of which they might, you know, listen to 3 people. So differentiating yourself that way is important. But when you go in there, a very detailed analysis of exactly what you're going to do is important. I am only asking for seed money for my company this past year, and that was 5.4389 point some cents. We had everything in a use of proceeds worked out, and it's wrong. It's wrong because we're predicting the future. But the VCs, the people that are running the funds, they look across the table and they go, this is a management team that cares. They put the effort in. They worked on every single process, all of the salaries, anything. They know exactly what their stock option pool should look like. You also, for me, even though that money's only a 2-year burn and it's going to end in an IND submission, and hopefully the FDA is going to be like, hey, great job. We had to know how far a product is going to go through every bit of the life cycle to new drug approval, to the new drug application and approval. So 6 years out, we had to know that process completely because the business case is made on that. How much money are you going to spend in the trials? Where are they going to be? How many sites? What are your endpoints? How's it going to be powered? You have to know everything there is to know. And as a person running a startup, you should know. This is your thing. So that was the process, really. And having a great team to sit next to me was very helpful. Having a lot of good consultants when you have holes. And when you're pre-money, before you get your seed money in, attracting talent and telling them you're not going to pay them anything is a hell of a skill to have. And if you're not personable and buying a lot of beers, you're not getting there.
See, I know the beer side of him. So this is the first time I've heard this in passion business side. So that's great. Now I get it.
Yeah.
All right, so Daniel, you also had a death in the family that you were trying to change some behavior, and so your company is a company that's casting a vision on how you're going to get people to change behavior. How do you pitch a vision like that to potential investors and convince people that you're going to be able to change all these things?
Yeah, so to share the story, what led me from literally prison cells to the health and wellness space was my late grandmother, who she died now just under 3 years ago. She was just the light of my life, an incredible woman. For the last 10 or so years of her life, she had cancer and a host of other health issues. And she went from being this incredibly vivacious and life-loving person to gaining a lot of weight and getting depressed and not leaving the house. And every doctor would tell her that she needs to exercise, but unless a family member came around, she wouldn't get out of bed. And so the question that began to haunt me was, why with today's technology, couldn't I bring her to her home, both the instruction that she needed, as well as myself or one of my siblings live with her to get out of bed? And that was the genesis of the company. It led to conversations first with her doctors, then doctors across the country, and then to HR and wellness professionals, and saw this challenge of getting people who are struggling, helping them achieve their health and wellness goals was a huge, huge gap. Now, fast forward to today, we have cities that use us, we have universities, we've got hospitals, we've got employers of all sizes that use us, and we literally have, whether it's a lady who's at risk of gestational diabetes, her doctors recommended she does Bun Along, and she's now got one of her best friends who could be the other side of the country live with her, encouraging her while she's taking her classes, and she's showing up at night to do that class because there's a real person as well as an instructor she finds relatable. Or we have people in their 90s with Parkinson's disease who are at home, they're depressed, they're isolated, and every doctor tells them, you know, you need to exercise, it can slow the progression, even reverse some of the symptoms. The reason why they're getting out of bed to do it is because they got their grandchildren live on the screen with them. So that was my story, that's what we're doing. And what I certainly find is when the story is told in those terms and you're speaking to investors, everyone can picture someone from their family, a loved one, who this would make sense to, who this would make a difference for. And then when we tailor in that this is the data that we're getting, this is the results that it's making for people, they've been coming on board pretty quickly.
If you ever want to see a good, so there's a process that's really hard, especially A/B rounds, and it's a really hard process. And the process is to go from really big to really small very quickly. To go from a story about an individual and extrapolate that to a market, and then extrapolate that to long term. Because as we were talking about, you've got a huge data play there. If no one ever heard that, it would be like at the end versus at the beginning. That's what was my offering. I was like, yeah, put that at the beginning, because the thing that you're doing has this sort of sustainable flywheel. And as you get more people and more people, it actually builds upon itself and it becomes valuable, right? Which is where a lot of the unicorn companies have data, right? It's a big data-driven world, right? So, but it's really hard to go to pitch this really big thing and then to say, yeah, I have 4 customers and $1 million in ARR. And then you get from here to there.
You have your questions up now?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. We're gonna redeem himself.
There you go.
Well, yeah, so, I mean, I just did this all day today. So there's 3 parts to what I think is important. There's your pitch analytics, your offering. How do you pitch? And that's part of the story, and that's part of marketing. The second part is the market analytics. How does anybody value your market? Because they're not buying you, they're buying your market you're going to own. And if you don't understand that market as it changes over time, that's not going to matter. And the third thing is funding analytics. How much money can I get? How much can I spend and where can I spend? So I focus on 3 areas. But the offering analytics, the 7 questions that I had was, you know, the first one is your mission vision. So of course that's kind of open-ended. That's more of a hope of them getting a story like that. The second one is, why is it important today? Who does it impact? Why is it important that you do what you're doing long term? It's important to a couple people, but as a VC, you're not going to make me work to figure out how big that market is. I don't know how big that market is, but I know it sounds interesting. So why is it important today? And then, what is your product offering? The third thing is like, what are you actually selling? And this is where people trip up, because they think a product offering is about the technology. They think it's about the stack. They think it's not. Like, what are you offering? You are offering like a physical digital thing, right? You're offering this online class, and there's people involved, and then you have concierge. There's a whole big thing about what it is that you're offering and why someone's going to want it. The fourth question is, what is valuable about this offering? Like, why is it valuable? Why is it valuable to that person? Where's the data? Like, at the end of the day, I sell you something. At the end, what happens after that? And then the fifth question to me is, what evidence do you have that demonstrates that value? Okay, so now I've made a big pitch. I think that Burnalong is going to be a $500 million company because when it gets into the healthcare data it's collecting is going to be so valuable to all these companies, and they're going to see how can we change behavior over time, and if I can change behavior, I can reduce costs, all this other stuff, right? And if you can pitch that, and then you can drop it down to, I have 3 different points of value that I can show you that will extrapolate to that. This is how it goes from here to there. And then the last is, how does funding facilitate your mission? Like, why am I giving you money? Like, where are you going to spend that money? And you really, and again, if it's 30 seconds, you need to be clear about exactly how you're spending that money, because you don't have long to go down to a Excel spreadsheet and go down. It has to be specific. I am going to enter this market. I am going to get these customer bases. I am going to go after healthcare after that. I'm going to go for a B2B play, and it's going to become B2C. Like, how specifically am I going to move the bar? How do I get to what you're worth is $250 million? And you need to have that in your head, how much money I'm getting and how much return you're going to get right away. I'm raising 10 on 30, so let's say Burnalong. Let's say I'm raising 20 for you, And unless I gotta get at least a 40 million pre, right? So after that, that $20 million, I better see a $200 million, $250 million valuation when you spend that money afterwards. So I don't care about your valuation now, I care about how much, when I spend that money, what's worth. That's all I care about. And then 1 or 2 steps beyond that, where NEA, if you get an NEA, they want to be 2 or 3 steps out. And then they're going to extrapolate back. Right?
All right, we'll talk about NEA in a bit. So, Krista, so when you started out in your world, you were one of the few women in the world, and now you're
One of the few women.
Yeah, one of the few women. I just want to talk about
Hasn't changed that much.
overcoming obstacles because now you're back in the startup world, and it's a younger person's game, and you're not as young as you once were, and so overcoming all those things. Now, we've talked about this. We've talked about this.
Krista, throwing it all out. I'm turning 60 this week. He didn't ask me about age.
No, but we've talked about this.
No, but he knows this. Okay, so there's a couple things. So starting out, I'm 55, so starting out from sort of 80, I was the first part of my life I worked in China a lot. I never faced any sort of sexism at all. Nothing. Absolutely nothing until I hit, it's like 2010. So it was a different generation. I had an incredible amount of male mentors. I was fast on my feet. I had phenomenal parents. You know, my father would say, don't drink in a room with all those guys, like get your seltzer water. I mean, I did a lot of things that, like, you know, that made myself, I didn't put myself in stupid situations. There was a senator who asked me out to dinner, and I did tell him, I don't think that's a good idea. I'm like 23 years old. So, you know, there were, but I never had a moment of trouble till around 2010 when there was like around after the recession, and then things started to shift. So I would say that I do think women bring different things to the table. But I love men. I'm raising 2 sons. But I do think we bring a little bit of a different sensibility. As an innovator and someone who's really been recognized as that, is my biggest concern is wanting to have people really think big. And I think sometimes women don't do that. They stay in their knitting, and so I want them to really think big about those ideas. And so I will say, what percentage of total funding goes to women? In the last year, the statistic was 2018. What percentage of the total funding, entrepreneurial funding, venture funding goes to women? Tell me, come on.
2%.
You know, 2%. 2%. And if you add in people of color, honey, you get 3. I know. It's like, great, come on. It's like 2%. So do not think you can go into a room. Do not think you can go into a room and raise money. Do not think that will happen by yourself as a woman. And people are like, Krista, I can do it. I'm like, don't do it. Bring Carl with you. Bring another guy with you. If you want the money, get over it. Get the money. But I have had some things in 2010. I had some situations in funding that were really egregious, like really. I was pitching life science angels on the stage, you know, Stanford Club, Palo Alto, and I was pitching a digital health company in obesity management, and it focused on behavior science. It had all the research. They loved it. They put me to the top. And this guy stood up, he was working, he'd invested in the company, and he stood up in front, 200 people, and said, I don't like you, get her off the platform. And I said, would you have done it to a guy? So he said, I don't like her, get her off the platform. We don't need groups in behavioral health. I think you and I would have conversations about the importance of groups and motivating. But so I stood there frozen. You know, I'm going for my Series A, 3 million, and I said, well, I quickly, everyone, and of course everyone's looking at me. I'm just standing there as this guy is literally shouting at me. And I said, well, why are you here? He goes, it's my investment group. And I said, well, why don't you go home and do it on your phone? He said, this is my investment group. I learn from other people. It's motivating. I love it. I said, go fuck yourself. You know, you just proved the theory, like right there.
F5 Brews, that's a first.
I want to live with that.
But you know, you would have loved that. But the problem, I lost all my time to talk. He yelled at me, no more time to talk. He got kicked out. And like, it was just awful. It was awful. It was so awful. We had worked so hard, and he destroyed that opportunity for me. Like, I mean, it was just, people were nice and they were kind, but I didn't get to pitch. I didn't get to show them my slides. I just got kind of attacked.
Yeah,
So
your stuff is amazing because
My-
I've had like over the time I know Carl, so many women clients and great ideas, great stuff. And again, there's some men clients that are just like that, but there's a more preponderance of women where they built something and they're like, this is my baby. I don't want it to grow up or go away, or I don't want it to die. And you know, when you send it out there, it could die. Like you
Exactly.
and so the risk taking, we have to, as a culture, have to be able to tell people it's okay to fail. Like I have 2 daughters, and I talk to them about it every day.
Yeah.
Like my daughter is in Hollywood, and she got her first gig, and it was a 2-month thing, and it ended, and she started crying. I go, we knew it was 2 months. And then she interviewed for something else and didn't get it. I go, you're in the land of rejection, and you're in the land of failure, and this is what you wanted to do. Suck it up, get more leads, get more stuff, fail more, because in your 20s, if you don't fail a lot of times, you're never going to go anywhere. Like you have to fail.
Yeah, you've got to take those risks. So, I mean, there are more stories that I can drink with you at another time, but I don't think it's great. I see a lot of, we're trying to get female founders going, but I know that's great, but are those founders, do they actually have the right thing?
Right.
Which is kind of a hard thing to do. So I think it's very exciting. And Carl, bear with me for one. So just want to say that Jackie and I are working on a nonprofit. Do you all have a mom? Mom still? Mom? Okay. I just want to tell you, we are working on a project because it's about females. We're working on a project on the impact of ageism in hiring for women 45 and over. So there's
This is why I did the age thing, guys.
Exactly, he's right. But we're working on, and the statistics are shocking. I sent out 250 resumes 6 months ago and couldn't get a job. Okay, so there's a lot going on for women. There's a lot going on in our society for our retirement, our income, our health, and all these has huge cost implications for our society. But, so it's not getting better necessarily. Definitely not.
All right,
I'll
so
talk to you later.
Definitely.
when I'm helping a software
Big
company
idea.
get to their next round, I always know what the hurdles are, what the metrics are that they need to hit, because it's all tied to revenues, right? Jeff, you're gonna go out for a Series A.
Yeah.
What metrics do you have to hit to get to NEA or name your Series A funder?
Sure. So, when I just started talking to some firms at the MetaMute event, and some people may have been to that last week. I think it was last week. What I tell them when they ask me, what's going to trigger funding from us? What's going to trigger that funding? And for me, it might be a little hard to understand because I don't think there's a lot of therapeutics people here, but it's just 2 things for me. It's outcome from a pre-IND meeting with the FDA where the FDA says, I've heard your clinical development plans and I'm going to buy into them. I'm going to tell you that, I'm just going to give you the high sign. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but we're not going to block anything. That's one. The second thing will be an early readout on toxicology. That's the Series A, right? So basically, the investor wants to know that when I do have that product ready for the clinic, I'm going to be able to treat man. And when I do have that product ready, it's not going to kill someone according to all the data that we have in the animal models. So that's that. And on the top of that, there are secondary milestones that they would want to see. Orphan drug designation, I don't know if anyone knows what that is, but if you're going for, well, you do. All right, one person. If you're going for a rare disease, less than 200,000 patients in the U.S., it's a big regulatory application, and if you get it, it makes your drug development cycle cheaper. So you get tax credits and things like that.
Like your model that you're doing right now was kind of like the model that actually it's flipped, because back in the day it was so hard to get, like in the 90s and 2000s, it was really hard to get something like you funded.
Yeah.
But then the IP shifted, so you got a lot of people that have moved over where they feel comfortable there's IP and there's buyers out there. So there's a lot of buyers that are buying things at 150, 250, 500. There's a whole bunch of data around people buying things that have made it a certain way. In the tech space, it's really, again, it's kind of like binary, because it used to be that you started a company and you got a Series A and Series B, you've got a little bit of revenue, 4 or 5 million or 10 million, and if it didn't really go, everybody knew you could sell it for 40, 50, $100
Yeah.
million bucks. That's not the case these days. Like there's not, that market isn't the same. Because there's a lot, the money has kind of moved up, and the big money has really gone after these big markets. Because private equity's come in, and private equity is gonna leave at some point, there's gonna be this big sucking sound. You know, like, which is a WeWork thing, right? You can't have SoftBank put $20 billion at a $43 billion valuation and then buy it a couple weeks later for 8. Like, that's a problem. So these valuations are all getting crazy. Your market's a little more stable, a lot more money has gone to it. Boston specifically went from tech to biotech.
Yeah.
You know, it's really interesting, but the same way that you're pitching your thing, other people, you have to pitch it like that. Like, I need X amount of dollars to get X along in my roadmap. This is my roadmap, and it's not just about revenue, but revenue is super important. It's a marker. But I'm going to own this market. I'm going to have this data or this thing. There's intangibles around it. And again, I've built some algorithms in my thing around how do you value a company outside of revenue. And basically, I've looked at how the VCs are valuing stuff right now, and basically, there's actually a methodology to it. And so it's really interesting what's happening there. Just as yours, it's like very brand oriented. If something becomes a brand, or can become a brand, even if it's a niche brand, you have to value the brand capability of it in the long-term play.
So, just one more comment. So one of the bigger challenges of therapeutics too is that when you start a company around, let's say here most of the time there's an academic center or the NIH has made some therapeutic and they've gotten it to a point where, and you've done the diligence, and you think it's something worthwhile. So by worthwhile, if you don't think it can eventually be put in a human, it's not worthwhile. It generally isn't. But at that point, if it is, it's usually 4 to 6 million to get to a milestone where people say that is a value inflection point type milestone.
Mm-hmm.
It's at least, a twofold jump in value of your company. And that kind of funding to get there, that 4, 5, 6 million is, it's possible because we did it, but it's almost, it's difficult because there are no $5 million investors. There really aren't any $2 million investors. There are $250,000 investors, 100,000, some 500,000, and then there are 10 and 100, 50 million.
That's exactly where the market's at right now.
Yeah. This next round, I only need one investor. For the first round, I had 7.
It's messy.
So I had to get 7 people to say, hey, that's something I'll put money behind.
By the way, I
So,
know
it's a
that
struggle.
if Uber and Airbnb came out today and they pitched the same way they pitched before, there's no way they would get money, not $1. No, there's no way they would make it, because they had a captive market of people that were still looking for early stage stuff, guys like Bill Gurley and people that were really good down there, and they were looking at people and they were getting pitched individually. Now, like I got Barry Eggers at Lightspeed, you can't, like I can get to him, but like you can't get it to him anymore, and they're so busy pushing money up on the growth stuff. He came to me one time, I had this company, it was really great, and he said, Mark, you're asking for 5 to 8. Forget it. Go get 2, and if you can prove into 3 markets that this thing has some legs to it, I can get you 25. And I was like, Barry, 2 is hard to get to prove out 3 markets. It was a consumer play. He was like, yeah, sorry. I got like 10 of them coming in.
So I'm going to go to audience questions here in a minute, but I'm going to surprise you with one, Daniel. So Mark and I were on the board of his company together, and the day after 9/11, the whole world changed, right? We got an email from our investor who pulled out of our Series B and told us to cut everybody's salary in half. So the world changed in a day. And so things are frothy right now. We're having this frothy conversation. What if between now and January 1, when you kick off this, or January 2, when you kick off this capital raise, things change? All of a sudden, we're not, in this frothy market, and, $10 million isn't available to you. How are you going to adjust your business model, and what are you going to do?
And it's the famous line of battle plans that you come up with. No battle plan survives first contact with the enemy. I think it's the same across the board. And so for us, it's part of it is by having a good board and some good existing investors who could step in if needed and are pretty much firmly behind what we're looking to achieve, why we're looking to achieve it, to get back to the why and the and the mission, but we'll adjust. I mean, it's from when we started and we had the idea. Every step of the way, I wouldn't say that anything has gone as planned. I think it's Reid Hoffman who described running a startup as trying to assemble an airplane while jumping off a cliff, which I think is a fair analogy. So, in the event that things change, we would just adjust accordingly. Probably go back to existing investors, get an extension, and work it through that way. But on the other hand, I think it's often when the market contracts, if there is good opportunity, there's still money for it. And so one of the things that we've been focused on is getting marquee clients using us. So we've got folks like Kaiser Permanente and Johns Hopkins and cities using us, and we've got the data to show it's working for their employees. There's higher engagement. There's the product itself is working. We've got that backstop where it's not a few people in a garage saying this might be working or this isn't working.
That's a good answer. I like that. All right, so
Come on. Well, let's comment on that.
let's get some hands going up for
I just want to say the importance of a strategic customers, because one time we bid on $1.5 million project, we signed it, everything was ready to go, fine, and then California, which Harcourt and I were both working for the state of California, they pulled out, so I was gonna, suddenly have like $1.5 million less revenue overnight, and Harcourt sent me a check the next day for $100,000 and said, don't touch the employees, you're one of our most valuable partners, we'll fix this.
Oh, that's
and I
great.
never had to pay it back. So those clients, make them love you, and I mean, that I've never forgotten that, ever.
So I think if the business, so like one comment on, and you go, I gotta get out of here.
a lovely crew here.
I need your card.
Yeah, the one thing that I would tell you from Carl's comment is I'm a contrarian. So I think frothy market's bad for you. I think there's so many people gazed on big numbers that aren't valuable, like the WeWork stuff. You got a solid business, it's got great data, it's gonna grow incrementally, it's not like you got a flywheel, but it's not gonna explode overnight, and that's not getting any attention. Like if the market goes to crap,
Real business.
all that money's gonna fly down into the deals that are sitting there right now, this market that I think is just ripe, So, again, I'm not praying for the market to go to crap, but it would actually not be bad for you.
All right, any audience questions? None? Anybody? Okay. All right, you gotta go.
One thing to add, which might be several investors who've now invested us, when we first approached them, they said no. And so I think it's valuable, even if someone says no, keep them updated with your progress. Because if they then see that you've done a year later what you said you were going to do, then it becomes a no-brainer for them. They're just paying a higher premium for it. So a number of investors who invested with us later on have passed initially, and then they came on later on to the process.
I want to get your plan for a turn of
Sure.
the economy. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think about that. I have my friends that are, out in the field, and some investment people telling me to, buy gold and things like that. For me, there's plan A, plan B, and plan C that we work on constantly. I've only talked about, hey, I'm going to go after the Series A, I'm going to start at JP Morgan, I got some people lined up to talk to. I do. I hope I don't get the Series A. Plan B is a strategic partnership with a large pharma, which we have some sponsor research agreements with academic centers, building a data set to get back in front of those partners. And if the data are good, it'll drive that. I'll get to save some more equity. Plan C is we have multiple grants in a phase 2 SBIR. That's the plan I don't like, but it'll keep you living. If we get those, our first grant, we scored a 13 on, which is, if you know SBRs, that's good. So, the guys, I can't take credit for that. The guys that wrote that were fantastic. And that could keep you living until the upturn happens. But one thing is, if you do have very deep-pocketed investors, blue-chip investors, I think a downturn at least for me, it probably affect me much less, affect the company much less, because they're not, you know, if I'm trying for 30 million or 40 million, that's not, believe it or not, that's not a big chunk of change for like NEA and Sanofi Ventures. I mean, they're not going to go bankrupt, I don't think.
And they're buying gold now anyway.
Yeah, they're way ahead of the game, yeah.
All right. Any questions from the audience? There, I knew we'd get one.
So the question is for Daniel. I mean, you've successfully, it's a good business. Can you kind of share some of your emotional challenges or whatever the challenges of being a CEO, running a company, building the business and team while raising money? That's very hard, because I went through that and I found that very, very hard.
And she just sold her company. So.
Oh, congratulations on the sale. It's definitely hard. I've got, and this now, it's been on my whiteboard in my office for 2 years there. I've drawn a giant pendulum, which just to always remind myself it's going to swing both ways. And so I savor the highs, knowing that it's going to swing the other way as well. And so that just reminds me of it. I probably have somewhat of an advantage in that, you know, in a past life I was sitting across from terrorists in prison cells, and so some of the things that might hit me now pale in comparison to that. So it probably phases. I'm probably more even keeled than most people. I've also got a terrific wife and kids, which always reminds me what's important in life. So I think that keeps me very, very grounded. But I am a strong believer in that ultimately, if you just do the work that you're meant to do and just keep pushing through, it'll work out in the end. I think you probably have to be an optimist to start a company in the first place, and there's just the belief that it's gonna come through. And thankfully, that's what happened. That's what happened every step of the way. But I think it's also the other thing that's really been valuable for me is also knowing at certain points you have to take a break and recharge. Like, one of my favorite books is High Output Management by Andy Grove, and one of his maxims is you're never going to get done everything that you need to get done in a day. So at a certain point, you've just got to say, okay, I'm going to stop it at this point, and this is as important for me to get a good night's sleep and recharge, because I'm just going to be more effective the next day. So it's things like that. It's always spending time with my kids and doing different things that keeps me grounded. And lastly, it's having a great team. You know, one of our board members is a lady called Pernilla Spears Lopez. She's a former president and global head of HR of IKEA. And one of the big things that she was pushing on us from the start was, she said to me, if you aren't able to take a day off, you haven't built the right team. And fundraising is when that really comes into play, because you've got to be on the road, just meeting investors and spending all that time. And so you've got to have a great team who are doing that. I think part of the other piece of that is no one's ever going to do something exactly like you would want it done, but good enough is good enough. And doing that's been the approach.
Yeah, I like your comment about the team. I have as a company I'm an advisor to, where the CEO was sidelined by some horrible health thing. It was like a collapsed lung or a heart or something. I mean, it was like major, and he went in the hospital, and I didn't see him for a while, and he came out, and he had made all this progress in this business. I was like, how in the world did you do that? He said, I have a great team. So, Jeff, I'm going to throw this to you without any details. I know you got sidelined here recently, but you haven't missed a beat. How did you go about managing through that?
Well, yeah, it is team. You know, I have complete confidence and faith in the crew that I have, because they're fantastic. They're much smarter than I am. You know, and they don't have the same amount of experience, but when it comes to taking the product and making sure they can advance it and convince you know, people on our board that are working with us consistently that we're doing the right things, you know. I don't have to be there every moment of the day. And if I did, then I have the wrong team, or I'm not managing properly. But yeah, so I missed 8 days. That's it.
Wow.
Well, I did half days for a while.
He was messaging me from where he was. So he wasn't totally cut off.
Yeah.
So one other thing that I've observed in the last 15 months going in and out of startups here in DC is nobody laughs.
You made us laugh earlier.
I like to laugh. It de-stresses, it makes you smile, brings out something, but you have to kind of laugh. You have to at some point have those de-stress. So I like to have an environment that's no drama. You know, there's like lots of values like no drama's mine. Like I don't. At one point I had a company, there was a lot of drama, and I was like, okay, this is gonna kill me. But having a sense of humor and letting off some steam is okay, and being able to admit mistakes. I would publicly admit my mistakes all the time. They thought that was great. In the weekly meeting, I made this mistake. And they just thought that was great. So being very human, and I also would always do this as a CEO, I would go out and buy drinks, but I'd always leave. Like, I'm not their friend, I'm their boss. But once I did climb on top of a piano. We had won a big client, and we were, we were all doing a sing-along, and then I just would leave my credit card with my number. The other brunette who was British, and she'd say, how much can I put on the Amex? And, she'd pay the bill, and I'd leave, and quietly. So I just think that you have these moments where let them come together, but they would see me holding up. They would see me holding up. And yes, I do like to laugh.
We have one question in the back
What?
here, and then we're gonna probably have to wrap it.
I'm from Boston. I have to.
I love it.
All right.
Someone says do the accent.
Question to piggyback on your hurdles of being a woman in trying to raise money. What are your thoughts or experience? I'm starting to see down south some trends, I'll call it at the angel funding level, where it's kind of special interest funding, whether it's the LGTB community, whether it's a specific minority community. Yesterday I was listening to a combination incubator funding where it was for someone who had to have been incarcerated. I'm starting to see more and more that special interest funding pop up. Just curious what your experience or thoughts are on that.
Sure. I think the issues are critically important. I don't like it overall as a way to. There's something about it that ends up being discriminatory to somebody else sometimes. And so we were talking about older, women being 45 and older. I've done a job application, and there's they're gonna, are you this, are you that, are you this, are you that, are you disabled, are you a military member, are you this? And after a while you feel like you're nothing. So I don't know enough about it, so I won't say, but I tend to like things that are both genders. I think we can both learn, but when it's there's so much going on that's so specialized, it's a little tricky. And I don't know how that's going to play out. I wish that Max was still here, but I have felt like, how do you act as an investor in that area? Like that, how do you? And I worked with some incarcerated folks, formerly incarcerated folks, and it's a very different kind of investing. It's a social impact investing to a certain degree. So I can talk to you more about it later. I think it's very important to raise the visibility and to get the money there. But how you do it and how you then make others feel included is important. Did I make sense on that one? Yeah.
All right, so Kathy usually likes to wrap us up, but I want to thank you all for coming, and I want to thank our panelists. You guys are great. This is a lively group, and I thank all of you for coming out tonight. And Kathy, wrap it here.
No. Actually, I'm done. Thank you guys for coming, but I want you to wrap it up because this I thought was phenomenal. Tell them about it and have them pick it up. No, there was a lot of really juicy stuff in there.
I forgot. So we have leftover handouts from this morning. If you were here this morning, sorry, you already got one of these. Where are the handouts? Can you hand those out? Can somebody just pass them around? Yeah. So look, this right here, this slide deck that I handed out this morning after my presentation. I went to the Harvard Private Equity and Venture Capital course this year, and this slide deck, they say, was worth the $10,000 we paid for it because it has such interesting information on the trends in the venture community. Some good humor in here. It also shows that 7 of the 10 top companies in the world were all venture-backed companies. So that's interesting. It also shows, I think it's interesting, is the impact that SoftBank has had on the industry. They come in and they put in, and here's the SoftBank companies right here, they'll put in hundreds of millions of dollars, sometimes billions of dollars into companies, and they basically pick the winners. You know, they say, you're going to be the unicorn in this space, and it really scares all the competition out of the space. So you end up creating the winner. And so there's less of an emphasis on IPOs today because of all the private equity in the marketplace. There's 75 slides. Those are the 3 takeaways that I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you for doing that. You guys